All right. If we are live, I think we are. Yeah. Yep, I think we're live. Hey, what is going on? This is Tanner Gers, Executive Director of My Blind Spot, and I am chilling here at the office. Very excited to be introducing myself. I am making sure that I'm reaching over here to the right because, I'm a coffee fanatic and I'm a little bit bougie when it comes to my coffee. So right here, I've got one of my favorite coffee cups, and of course, nothing but the best. We got that organic, fresh ground today. Like I ground it up in the French press. I boiled the water on the stove and delicious. So, and yeah, I know it's 3:30 p.m. Eastern, but right now it's only 12:30 where I'm at in Pacific and Arizona time. So it's a good time to be drinking some coffee. So I just wanted to introduce myself and start talking about some of the things that I'm really excited about with my blind spot. I came on to the team back in 2016, and after working with Albert and doing our thing, working with Anthony, working with our guys, I was just the seventh person on the team, and now we've grown to over 2 dozen people internally. How exciting is that? A few months after coming on to work with Albert and everybody else at my blind spot, I was promoted to executive director, and I've been really involved with strategic planning and development. How are we going to make this thing big and change the world? Human resources, although Albert doesn't really like having a human resources department. Uh, and of course, helping out with sales and leading that effort. We are super, super, super excited about our growth as a team and what that means for you. So, what do I mean by that? Well, specifically and historically, we've kind of really been carving out a name and a niche for ourselves in the corporate landscape. I mean, we've got clients like American Airlines. We're wrapping up our project with Toyota. If you live in New York, then you might be happy to know that we have helped make the Peapod app one of the best food delivery apps around. So I think we're even getting into the New Jersey area with the Peapod and the surrounding areas. So I know we've gotten some great feedback on that. And that is really where we've been historically. Now, where we're branching out to is both in the government and education verticals. My phone's blowing up. Both the government and education verticals. So what does that mean? Well, as an end user, as someone who is reliant on assistive technologies, unfortunately, in the past, many times, governments don't have their resources, their offerings, their digital offerings accessible and usable by people with disabilities who are reliant on assistive technologies. So, what are some examples? Well, let's talk about voting, right? Some of the voting mechanisms for you to be able to order home ballots aren't accessible. And why isn't that available in a digital format yet? We're working to improve on that. How about paying your bills, utility bills, like with the water company or electric company? We're working on that. We're working on all the different ways that, buying health insurance. If you're buying, through Obamacare or, whatever the Trump care thing is, if you're buying health insurance, how are you doing that? I personally have had tremendous difficulty doing that stuff. So that's why we're branching into the government space to really help all our citizens, all constituents be able to use the services and the resources available to them that are equal, provide equal access to non-disabled peers. Of course, in the education vertical, as someone with a disability who became a part of this community later in life. See, I was in a really bad auto accident at age 21. So I had this very unique perspective of what life is like before a disability and what life is like after a disability and everything that's associated with that. So everything from, education, stepping into a classroom with a disability and stepping into a classroom without a disability. I understand that distinctly. What it means to, you know, to look for gainful employment as someone with a disability. Let me tell you something. It is a lot easier when you do not have a disability. I don't remember one time not going into an interview and saying, hey, we'll let, or excuse me, I don't remember one time going into an interview, getting the in-person interview, getting to that step in the interview process and hearing, we'll let you know, and not getting the job. I always crush. I crush because I understand how to communicate my value. I understand what the employer is looking for, and I align myself accordingly, right? And so it's a real easy decision for an employer to look at me as someone without a disability and make that decision. And yet here I am equipped with assistive technologies, equipped with even more acumen, more experience, and more knowledge, more value to bring to the table. And I would hear in the past, like, oh, we'll let you know, or you're not qualified, or you're not capable, or whatever the excuse is. And, that's why we're really doubling down in the education vertical. Because as people with disabilities, one of the greatest ways that we can substantiate our value when we get to the table is to see those letters beyond our name, right? Like a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD. Those are the things, those are the little things that we have to do and go the extra mile just to be considered equal or capable of doing something. And right, so we want to make sure that all education learning management systems, the LMS platforms, are accessible. We want to make sure students can book those appointments with their teachers and really be competitive in the education market, be competitive in the employment market, and especially with employment rates being so incredibly low for regular ambulatory non-disabled populations, right? I think we just saw the Department of Labor put out that we have less than 4% unemployment. I think it's one of the lowest numbers in recorded employment history. And yet, the blind population is hovering just under 70% unemployment. The overall disability population is hovering above 10%. And we want to fix that. At My Blind Spot, it is our mission to inspire accessibility for all, right? How to tap into that at an organizational level, how to tap into that at the university level, the K through 12 level, how to tap into that at the government level. Right? So those are some of the things that we're working on. Those are some of the things that I'm super passionate about at My Blind Spot, and what I'm looking forward to in the future. Let me take a sip of this French press before I let it get cold. I had to double dip on that. It kind of warms the soul. This French press coffee. So, um, one of the other things that I'm super excited about that I've been really pushing for is to expand our services, right? Expand our service offerings because we just have so much to bring to the table that we would be doing everybody, the community, the disability community, and the United States, the world at large, a disservice if we weren't leveraging these opportunities and really creating meaningful change with regards to antiquated beliefs, social stigmas, and stereotypes around people. So last week, we just got back from doing an organizational and physical accessibility audit, right? So historically, we've been focusing 100%, you know, finely tuning, sharpening iron with iron in the digital accessibility and usability space. That is one huge important part to accessibility, usability, and inclusion, diversity and inclusion across all private and public sectors. But organizational accessibility is another huge component, right? So, like, let's say you're someone with a disability, you are super ready, you're super qualified, you've got all the talent in the world, and you step into a work environment, it's not accessible on many levels. not just the software on your computer, the internal intranet is inaccessible, but you having an inaccessible, non-inclusive interview process, training process, onboarding, coaching, mentoring, long-term career development is inaccessible. It's not, unfortunately, the old school handbook for how to recruit, to hire, to train and onboard, to mentor and coach, to the performance plans for people without disabilities does not fit exactly, does not support people with disabilities, right? And it's different across disabilities, right? Like even let's stick with blindness right now. You know, when I became totally blind, like I'm totally blind, there's no light, there's nothing. I just see blackness, right? I didn't know that there was varying levels of blindness. I just didn't know. I never met a blind person before. I'd never been around that. And so I didn't know that there's varying degrees of blindness, right? I didn't know that I mean, I guess like, I guess interacting with my grandparents, I can reflect like, hey, like there's different degrees of hearing loss, right? There's different degrees, being a US Paralympian and representing my country on one of the largest stages possible, in sports and athletics, I became aware of the differing degrees of mobility, right? Even with paraplegics who have differing levels of core control, whether from below the sternum and down or below, the legs and down, or even someone who has a mobility impairment where they can walk short distances, but not much more than that, right? Or a quadriplegic or a partial quadriplegic, right? There's so many different varying degrees of disability. And so when we talk with organizations and how to change their cultural mindset, really open their cultural mindset, understand that how we're doing things right now, if we want to bring in some serious human capital, if we want to upgrade, be diverse and inclusive, not just being diverse and inclusive, but support diversity and inclusion to be the best that they can be. Our diverse and inclusive, our diverse workforce to be the best that they can be. If we want to support them, train them, mentor them, coach them, and provide them a platform to create a career, a life, a professional life worth living, right? Then we've got to open up our minds to how we address these things. Because people with disabilities might be triangles, right? We might be octagons. We might be squares, right? We're certainly stars. And when you try to fit that, jam that into a round hole, we're going to run into problems. So Albert and I just got back from delivering an organizational accessibility audit in Toronto, Canada. Amazing time. People up in Toronto are fantastic, beautiful people. I was so impressed with how diverse and inclusive their workforce is. I mean, people from Jamaica and people from Haiti and people from all over the world. It was just like the accents from everywhere were just amazing, and I absolutely love that. And that cultural perspective in an organization, they also want to include people with disabilities. And that's what they brought us in to do, is to teach them how to do that, how to execute that, how to have the open mindset to realize, hey, it was so great working with them because they knew that they weren't doing things right and they wanted to learn how to do it right. So we help them with how they're going to do a phone interview with someone who's deaf, right? How do you do a phone interview with someone who's deaf, right? How do you do that? That's why we're brought in. How do you make sure that an old building that you're renting out multiple floors in an older building, how is that accessible to people who use wheelchairs, power chair or manual, to get to and from their desks? How about getting to and from their building? How about getting to the building from their parking spot? Right? These are things that we're opening minds. Very excited about that. So that's the organizational and physical accessibility, how we're branching out into that space. And what we are planning to do, I'll give you a little insight, a little pull the curtain back, if you will, on some of our strategic planning and development for how we're going to serve more people, more organizations, more governments, more educational institutions, and more people with disabilities, how we're going to inspire accessibility for all. So, one of the long term visions that I have for us is that as we continue establishing relationships with the digital space, the digital world, and we continue growing, building, and establishing relationships in the employment space, the organizational space, in the physical accessibility space, that we're going to create a beautiful bridge of opportunity where we're going to be funneling qualified candidates into employment opportunities with institutions, organizations, corporate clients who are disability ready, meaning that their intranet has been reviewed and assessed by My Blind Spot, that their organizational culture, their hiring practices, their training and mentoring practices, their long-term performance plan practices have been reviewed by My Blind Spot, that their physical accessibility and usability has been reviewed by My Blind Spot. Because those are the three big pillars. That's what we really need to accomplish when we're talking about inclusion, right? Digital, physical, and organizational / cultural, which is really that mindset, right? How do we change the mind of those who have been living in a different mindset for decades? It's challenging. It's certainly an uphill battle. We're kind of a little bit, Albert started this organization 10 years ago. So he was so ahead of his time. And now, as we come into our prime, as we begin expanding the team with incredibly talented people like Jonathan, our senior project manager, right? With Rich, with Joe, with the greatest testing team of all time, like the most incredible accessibility and usability manual testers of all time. Like, we are literally separating ourselves from the masses because you don't know until you know. And the only way to know is manual testing, manual accessibility and usability testing, whether that's in person for organizational and physical or remotely with the hardware, software, and assistive technologies used by people with disabilities. That's the only way to know. And that's how, at My Blind Spot, we're inspiring accessibility. So I love you guys so much. Thanks so much for tuning in with me. I really had a good time with this video. Would love to answer any of your questions. Would love to help you out. If there is something that you need, whether with it regards to organizational inclusion, physical inclusion, or digital inclusion, hit me up. Drop me a line, Tanner at myblindspot.org. TANNER at myblindspot.org. You can also book a meeting with me, right? You can see my calendar. It's updated live in real time at calendly.com/Tanner Gers. My last name is Gers. So Calendly, CALENDLY.com/Tanner Gers, which looks like Gers. So it's TANNER GERS, just the 4 letters from my life. So, love you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for being a part of my life. Thanks for spending time with me and allowing me to share what's going on in our lives, what we're so passionate about in My Blind Spot. We'll see you guys soon.